well-meaning, good liberals have that same ideology when it comes to being called out. Black history is not only more than CRT. We know that Black history is being appropriated. That's why I started sprinkling some of that purposeful provocativeness. Show of hands, most of us have heard about cultural appropriation in terms of like entertainment labor, right? Who's heard of cultural appropriation in terms of emotional labor? I want y'all to be thinking about very purposely, intentionally about emotional labor and how our emotional labor, our pain, our suffering, our trauma is flipped and then monetized. We usually think about cultural appropriation in terms of like, oh, a lot of us think about like the Addison Rays or the Charlie D'Amelios, what's going on social media as being like, oh, no, white people stealing from us. We don't recognize from a historical standpoint that we can make an analysis to connect the dots from radio, the internet, and recognizing that when we create these analyses about cultural appropriation, that we should not be held captive of recent times. When we're able to look at the history of this man right here and recognize how this man right here was able to curate not only an entire legacy, but it means it's just an entire genre that's dedicated to stealing the cultural productions, cultural representations of Black folks. My grandmother always said, and this is my language, but I think it's important for me to say it like this. She always say, Lil George, everybody wanna be a but don't nobody wanna be a. We can recognize this country loves the cultural productions of our community, but don't like the cultural producers of our community. And that's when we start getting into cultural appropriation. How can we split the labor from the flesh? How can we split the work from the person? Elvis Presley was able to do it in a masterful way. But listen though, these analysis is not saying Elvis Presley was bad, though he probably was. I'm making a bigger structural analysis about how Black labor is extracted from Black people. I want to be clear in this. This analysis has little to do with this man right here and more to do with a structural way in which capitalism is able to make it work. We exploit things that Black folks do. I would say that Black people, we like the archetype to pop culture. There is no pop culture without Black people. As a matter of fact, my example to say that is, when I talk about the cultural production versus the cultural producers, hey, African-American vernacular English is seen as being unintelligent, apolitical, illegitimate. But you know how words in our community gets legitimacy? The way them Black folks talk in New Orleans, it's jibber jabber. We don't care about none of that. We don't want to hear none of that. But the way that Dwayne Carter says bling bling, maybe we can do something with that word in that term. I don't think that the entire lexicon of the New Orleans Creole Cajun talk is good, but this word right here can be incorporated into the pop culture lexicon. This is what happened to these people right here. Thugberry, Little Richard. I didn't even know about these two people until I got to college. I'm born and raised Texas. I heard of Little Richard, but I didn't know who he was until I got to college. I never heard of Chuck Berry until I got to college, but I knew the Beatles. I knew Elvis Presley. Black history and cultural appropriation. I can make a critique to say we shouldn't always think about Black history in terms of pessimism or in terms of negativity, but we gotta be real though. We gotta go further in the past to talk about that than going to the 1860s, 1850s, the 1840s. If I talk about the 1840s on social media or in a classroom, I'm told I'm stuck in the past. This entire syllabus created around lesson plans for the 1800s. Would you go into an American history classroom and say, hey man, none of y'all born today was a colonist. None of y'all today was born as a British redcoat. So why do we care about this? Same reason why we should care about them right there. Because we know that what they did yesterday and last week, it brings us here today. In terms of entertainment labor, she put her blood, sweat, and tears in to make her dance. Dance go viral. We don't even know who the hell she is until a year later. Hey, the D'Amelio family, not just the D'Amelio family has been able to create a social media empire based off of the cultural productions of this Black woman. Probably D'Amelio, her family, millionaires. Look up Jalea. Jalea, you see, she doesn't have, she's not a millionaire. She's not seen as a millionaire. What does it mean for the cultural producer to get the short end of the stick of the cultural production they made? When it comes to Black history and understanding the historical position of Black women, we can say that one could ask the world, does the world love Black women or just love what Black women can do for the world? It's an important question. I would argue, politically, socioeconomically speaking, Black women are not loved. It's only love for what they can do for the world. And we've seen it happen with Jalea. Not only we see it happen with Jalea, we see it happen throughout social media. The same cultural aesthetics that Black women are demonized for, are seen as being hoes or baby daddies or whatever, we see that those same aesthetics are put on to non-Black women and they are celebrated. Some people say R&B is dying. I heard somebody say it on TikTok like, nah, R&B ain't dying, bitch, don't worry, these Black people don't want it. Want the rhythm, but don't want the blues. Yeah, performative activism is a concept I would say that is divorced from integrity. And it has a very transsexual desire to it, you feel me? From a gender standpoint, performative activism would be like, hey, I stand for women's progression politically, socially, economically, insofar I ain't gotta be challenged for it. Or be being like, hey, I'm an ally of trans people, trans women or women, that's as far as I go. Once you start asking more questions about trans identity, it falls apart. Performative activism, a lot of us think about it as being something for non-Black people, but to me, anti-Blackness is so pervasive that there are also Black people that are implicated in performative activism. This is what I want to acknowledge right here. Before it was cool to be Black, before it was cool to be an activist, before it was cool to be in resistance, a lot of people was chastised and delegitimized for being on some Black shit. Seen as the party poopers, seen as the bearers of bad news, seen as the people that's always want to cause division and never want to be positive. Now it's cool. Diversity and inclusion. It's a lot of diversity and inclusion professionals that are performative activists. Ain't nothing, that's all it is, say it like it is. You feel what I'm saying? And when I'm talking about diversity and inclusion, from a structural standpoint, performative activism is trying to make up for the failures of the civil rights movement. When Black people are murdered for not conforming to the law, we can acknowledge on a federal, state, structural level, states get to negotiate and pick and choose what law they're gonna conform to every time. Brown versus Board of Education passed in the 1950s. Clemson integrated to the 1960s. And my home city in the state of Texas, it integrated to the 1970s. Now, the same law that Black people are justified in being murdered for not conforming to, them same people get to negotiate how they're gonna do it. That's performative activism. Performative activism is saying, hey, Apple is able to exploit cobalt in the Congo as long as it wants to. And then Black History Month is gonna sell a red, black, and green I watch bracelet. There are a lot of people that say, hey, trans women are women, and then they do a whole bunch of transphobic things. Performative activism. And recognize when I'm talking about trans specifically, hey, we down south. A demographic with the lowest life expectancy down south is Black trans women. So as a Black person, if I can't acknowledge the uniqueness of Black trans women, I think I'm being lost in the sauce. And I'm trying to almost emulate white supremacist notions of gender to be able to get me a little bit of privilege, be able to get me a little bit of access, be able to get me a little bit of resource, be able to give me a little bit of legitimacy and credibility. Performative activism. I would argue, I ain't even gotta know much about Clemson and be able to say, I got all the money in my pocket and the money I'm gonna make to say I kick anybody but to show you explicitly how Clemson University is implicated within performative activism. Yeah, but we laugh, but we recognize there are individuals and or departments on this campus that will have not only an issue with me being a speaker and being here, but also have a lot of pushback behind the statement that I just made. Research over me search, and hey man, if I'm wrong, set me right. But if I ain't wrong, leave me the hell alone. I said what I said. Question of respect on the surface, but beneath it is more about like empathy and humanity. The distinctions between appropriation and appreciation, some think it's a thin line, but I don't think so. Before I go into asking some rhetorical questions that can make some distinctions between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, do we have any people that want to define this or give some of their own distinctions between appreciation and appropriation? Does what you're doing dehumanize an oppressed group? If the answer is yes, it's cultural appropriation. Is what you're doing taken from another culture without regard to the stories behind it? The question is yes, that's cultural appropriation. Are you being celebrated for being an innovation or a creativity for taking something from another culture, while those that represent that culture are being criticized and judged negatively? Is what you are doing perpetuating a stereotype that both provides entertainment and reduces the cultural significance of the oppressed group? There's a lot of caricatures of Black women that non-Black women get to use to create entire empires on. Not only is this criticism fit for the Tyler Perrys of the world, shout out to their brother doing a lot of things, but nobody is immune to criticism. There's a lot of social media content curators that take the most ugliest representations of Black women and try to emulate them with a wig or some nails or hot Cheetos and this, that, and the other. This right here is cultural appropriation within our community of people within our community. I identify as an anti-sexist sexist. I'm against sexism and patriarchy and misogyny. I read first wave feminism, second wave feminism, third wave feminism, black feminism, Chicano feminism. I've read it all. When I talk about being an anti-sexist, it's me staying implicated in my maleness, me staying implicated in my masculinity. I know that if you tell me, hey, Conscious, you said something that was sexist, I can't be like, girl, shut up. I read first wave feminism. How dare you? I'm acknowledging that a lot of well-meaning good liberals have that same ideology when it comes to being called out. I'm also acknowledging that a lot of well-meaning cisgender people feel the same way when it's being called out. And acknowledging that people don't like being called out, right? When I say I'm an anti-sexist, I'm hoping that the people can also think about being an anti-racist. When it comes to cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, it takes a little bit of fearlessness. You can't be scared of being called out. When I talk about being an anti-sexist, I'm gonna be fearless when it comes to giving an analysis or critique or criticism about masculinity, male domination. I am not scared of being implicated in my criticism. As a matter of fact, I don't think you're being real if you're not being real with yourself about how you're implicated in the stuff you claim you're against. Black history is more than a month. Black history is not critical race theory. Black history is not something that's centered around how white people become comfortable or uncomfortable in terms of blackness. Black history is every day. A lot of us don't recognize it right now, but we live in black history.